I've given this account 4 times now to 4 different boards, and each board has wanted a different thing from me. The first wanted to know how the pod was lost. The second wanted to know whether I had betrayed the fleet. The third wanted to know whether I had gone soft in the head from the cold, the way scouts sometimes do on the marginal worlds. This is the fourth telling, and I no longer care what any of you want. I am old and my membranes have never fully closed since that winter, and I have decided to tell it the way it happened, in the order it happened, so that at least once the record will be true. We had marked the world harmless. That is the first thing you have to understand. It was not carelessness. It was the survey, and the survey was thorough by our standards, and by our standards were the best in the reach. 3 passes from orbit, atmospheric composition within tolerance, no orbital defense grid, no energy signatures consistent with a warfleet. A population that clustered in small scattered settlements and lit them up every year at the deep of the cold season, with strings of colored light and open flame, and sang, and gave one another small wrapped objects. We had watched them do it. You do not decorate a world you expect to have to defend. You do not sing when a predator is at the door. So the assessment came back the way assessments come back when everything visible agrees: harmless, soft, a festival world, low priority for contact, lower for concern. The kind of place a scout cast is sent down alone, because sending more than one would be an insult to the cast and a waste of the pod. You have to understand how our doctrine worked, or none of the rest of it will land. The reach is not conquered by fleets. It is conquered by assessments. A fleet is expensive. It must be pointed, and pointing it wrong is the sort of mistake that ends bloodlines. So before any fleet moves, a scout goes down and weighs the world, and the weighing is everything. We do not weigh a world's weapons, because a world clever enough to hide its weapons is a world clever enough to make us waste the fleet. We weigh a world's temperament. We look at how a people carries itself when it thinks no one is watching, and we reason from that. A people braced and armed and grim is a people that expects trouble, and a people that expects trouble is a people that has trouble, and such a world we mark hard and approach with the fleet or not at all. A people that sings, a people that hangs colored light in the dark and gives its young sweets and lets those young wander out alone into the season. That is a people at ease, and ease means no trouble, and no trouble means soft, and soft means harmless, and harmless means one scout, 90 minutes down and up. The logic is clean. I still cannot fault the logic. Every step of it follows from the step before. That is what has kept me awake across 4 boards in 40 years. Not that we reasoned badly, but that we reasoned well from one buried false thing. And the false thing was so deep in the cast that no scout before me had ever thought to dig it up. We believed that ease meant no trouble. We had never once considered that a people might be at ease because it had already won its trouble, long ago, and kept on winning it every year, and had grown so used to winning that the winning looked like peace from orbit. I was that one. Ithek Vone, forward scout, 3rd Talon, cold intolerant like every Quarthany ever hatched and proud of it. We are a warm world people. Our blood does not move well below a certain temperature, our membranes crack. Our fine motor control goes first and our judgment goes second. We knew this about the target world. The survey had flagged the surface temperature at the landing latitude and the number was bad, and the cast master had looked at it and looked at me and said the exposure window was 90 minutes and that 90 minutes was more than enough to confirm the assessment and lift. 90 minutes on a harmless world. Down, sample, image, up. I had done it 40 times on 40 worlds, and I had never once needed the full window. The pod came down at the edge of a tree line, on a slope of white that the instruments called frozen precipitation, and that I would later learn the humans simply called snow, as if it were nothing, as if it did not kill. The landing was clean. The cold got in through the seam of the hatch before I had both feet on the surface. I want to be precise about the cold because everything that followed came out of the cold, and if you have not felt it, you will not believe me. It did not feel like temperature. It felt like a hand. It reached through the suit at the joints, where the suit had to flex, and it closed around the joints and squeezed, and the squeezing was pain, and the pain was slow and patient, and did not stop. Within 4 minutes my left talon would not fully close. Within 10, I understood that the 90-minute window had been written by someone who had never stood on that slope, and that the true window was very much shorter, and that I did not know how short. The pod's lift drive would not cycle. I have gone over this 1,000 times. It was not sabotage, and it was not enemy action. It was the cold, the same cold that was in my joints, in the coolant lines, thickening what was meant to stay thin. The drive turned over and caught and died, turned over and caught and died. On a warm world I would have had it open in 20 minutes. On that slope my talons would not grip the release, and my mind was already moving through syrup, and the light was going. Their star sat low and went lower, and the white slope went blue, and the blue went toward black, and the hand of the cold squeezed harder in the dark. I did the things a scout does. I want that in the record too, because the second board implied I had panicked, and I did not panic. I ran the cold failure protocol in the order it is taught. I cut the pod's external systems to route power to the joint heaters in my suit, and the joint heaters drew the power and turned it into a warmth so thin against that cold that I could not tell whether they were working at all. I keyed the fleet with an automated distress and got back the delay that I already knew I would get. The fleet was hours out at best, and hours was a word that had lost its meaning, because I was measuring my life now in the minutes before my talons stopped answering me entirely. I tried to seal the hatch and could not, because the mechanism that sealed it needed a grip I no longer had. Every protocol assumed a scout whose body still obeyed him. None of them had been written by anyone who had felt the cold take the obedience out of a body one joint at a time. That is the flaw in all our doctrine, I think now. It was written in the warm. For the warm, about a galaxy the warm had decided was also, fundamentally, warm. That is when the two small ones found me. I heard them before I saw them, which should have warned me, because I am a scout and I am not found, I find. But my hearing was already the least frozen of my senses. Two voices high, in the human speech band, coming down through the trees. And then the crunch of the snow under something wide and flat strapped to their feet. And then they were there at the edge of the pod's light, two of them, small, wrapped in bright fabric against the cold that was killing me, and that plainly was not killing them. Small, I have to make you understand how small. Among their own kind they were clearly juveniles, unfinished, a head shorter than the adults I had imaged from orbit. By our reckoning they were prey-sized, weaponless, soft-skinned, slow. Every instinct the caste ever bred into me read them the same way, harmless, doubly harmless, the soft young of a soft people on a soft world. I have laughed about that since, not often, but I have. They did not run. That was the first wrong thing. A prey animal that finds a predator in the dark runs, or freezes, or makes the noise that calls its herd. These two came closer. The smaller one, the one I would learn, was called Nessa, crouched down at the edge of my light with her covered hands on her covered knees, and looked at me the way you look at a thing you have decided is interesting rather than a thing you have decided is dangerous. The larger one, her brother, whose name was Tomas, said something to her in a low voice, and she answered without taking her eyes off me, and whatever she said made him stop arguing. Then she reached into the fabric at her front and took out a small object wrapped in bright paper, and she held it out to me across the snow. I did not know what it was. I thought my mind was slow, remember, the cold was in it. I thought it might be a lure. I thought it might be the thing that triggered the trap, because there had to be a trap. That was the only frame I had. A predator does not offer food to the thing it has cornered unless the food is bait, so I did not take it. I sat in the dying light of my pod with my talons frozen half open, and I waited for the ambush I was certain was coming, and the small human held out her small offering with her arm getting tired, and finally her brother took it from her and unwrapped it himself and ate half and gave her the other half, to show me, I think, that it was only food, only a sweet, a thing they carried for pleasure. On a world that was trying to kill me, They carried things for pleasure. I did not understand it. I logged it as anomalous and I kept waiting for the trap. I want to stay inside that moment a little longer because the boards always rush me past it and it is the hinge of the whole account. Consider what I saw and consider that I saw it correctly and drew from it exactly the wrong conclusion. I saw two unfinished young of a soft-skinned species wander alone into a killing dark, unarmed, unafraid, and offer food to a cornered predator. From that I concluded, soft, unguarded. A people so unthreatened that it lets its young run loose in the season. A people that has forgotten how to fear. Every piece of the observation was true, and the conclusion was inside out. They were not unafraid because they had forgotten fear. They were unafraid because the dark and the cold were their dark and their cold, mapped and mastered and lived in since before either child could walk. And a child who has grown up inside the hand of that cold no more fears a night on the slope than I fear a warm corridor. I read the absence of their fear as the absence of anything to fear. It was the presence of a competence so complete it had become invisible, even to them. The brother went away and came back with the adult. I had imaged the adults from orbit, but I had never stood near one, and standing near one, even a slow old one, corrected something in my sense of scale that the orbital images had gotten wrong. He was not large by the standards of the brute casts I had fought on other worlds, but he was dense. He moved through the killing snow the way I move through a warm corridor, without thought, without cost, and he came down the slope to my pod and he crouched, they all crouched, to bring their heads level with mine. I did not understand that either, not then, and he looked at me for a long time. He was old. I could read that much across the species barrier, the loose skin, the white growth on the face, the slowness that was not the slowness of cold but the slowness of a body that has been used for a long time. He said one word to the children and the children stopped talking. Then he said something to me low, and of course I did not have the speech, but the tone I understood, because tone is older than language. It was not the tone you use on an enemy. It was the tone you use on an animal you have found hurt in the snow, steady, low, meant to be understood by something that cannot understand the words. I want to be honest about my state of mind, because the boards always want to skip past it, and I will not let this one. I still believed it was a trap. I believed the sweet was bait, and the low steady voice was the sound a hunter makes to keep the wounded thing still while the rest of the pack closes. Everything I was, everything the cast had made me, told me that kindness from a predator is a technique and never a fact. So when the old one reached toward the seam of my pod, toward the frozen drive housing, I got my half-frozen talon around the only weapon I still had, a short blade at my hip, and I brought it up. He looked at the blade. He did not flinch and he did not draw back. He looked at it the way you look at a thing a frightened animal is doing, and he waited, and when I did not strike, because I could not, my talon would not close the last of the way. The cold had that too. He reached past the blade slowly, letting me watch his hand the whole way, and he put his covered hand flat against the housing where the cold had thickened the lines. And he felt the cold in it, and he understood something, and he looked back at me. And I swear to you across all these years that what was on his face was not triumph. It was recognition. He knew what the cold was doing to me because the cold was the water he swam in, and he had just understood that it was drowning me. He said something to the children. The brother ran. The old one did not try to move me. I think he understood that moving me would kill me faster. Instead, he did the thing I have never been able to fully explain to any board, the thing that started the long unmaking of everything I had come down believing. He began to build a wall. Out of the snow, out of the very thing that was killing me. He cut it into blocks with a flat tool the boy brought back, and he stacked the blocks into a curved wall on the windward side of my pod, and the small one, Nessa, packed the seams with loose snow, working with her small covered hands fast and sure, a child doing a thing she had plainly done before, a thing that was ordinary to her. They built a wall of the killing cold to hold the killing cold off me, and it worked. Within the curve of that wall the hand of the cold loosened. Just slightly, just enough. And my mind came up out of the syrup by a finger's width. And I understood for the first time, dimly, that these people did not fear the thing that was killing me because they had learned to make the thing that was killing me do work. I have tried to make my own caste understand what that wall meant, and I have failed, because my caste hears, they built a wall of snow, and pictures a crude thing, a heap. It was not a heap. The old one cut those blocks to a size and set them in a curve with an overlap at the joints, and angled the whole of it against the wind, and left a low gap at the base on the leeward side that I did not understand until I felt the warmth of my own body begin, faintly, to pool inside the curve and stay there. It was engineering. It was a technology as old as their species and as reflexive to them as breathing. A technology for taking the thing that wants you dead and folding it into a shelter. And the old one deployed it without a tool worth the name and without a word wasted, in the dark, in a cold that would have finished me in the time it took him to cut the third block. On my world we would have called that a miracle and built a shrine to whoever did it first. On theirs it was a thing you taught a child, so the child would not die on a walk. That was the first crack. I will name them as they came, because the boards always want to know the exact moment I turned, and the truth is there was no single moment. There was a series of cracks, and this was the first. The wall of snow, built by a child, against the cold that had already half-killed a trained scout of the warm world castes. They kept me alive through the night. I do not know all of how. My record from that night is broken, the way memory breaks under cold, in bright pieces with dark between them. I remember the old one packing something warm against the joints of my suit, wrapped stones, I think, heated somewhere and carried down, replaced when they cooled. I remember the boy Tomas working at the frozen drive housing under the old one's low direction, his small hands doing what my frozen talons could not, and getting the housing open, and the old one looking into it and shaking his head in a gesture I would learn meant no, not tonight, not with what we have. I remember the small one Nessa sitting inside the snow wall with me, not touching me, just present, humming something low and tuneless in the human speech band, the way you might sit with any frightened thing to let it know it is not alone. I remember being furious in the broken dim way the cold allowed that I could not understand why they were doing it. There was no profit in it. I was not their kind. I had shown them a blade, and they kept me alive. There was a stretch near the middle of the night that I have never told any board, because the first three would have used it to prove I had gone soft in the head, and perhaps I had. But this is the true telling, so here it is. Somewhere in the deep of it, when the warm stones had gone cold again, and the old one had gone up the slope to heat more of them, and only the small one was with me, the cold got back into my mind, and I stopped believing any of it was real. I decided, in the flat certain way the cold makes you decide things, that I had already died on the slope in the first hour, and that all of this, the wall, the sweet, the small humming presence beside me, was the thing a dying scout's mind builds to keep itself company at the end. And I remember thinking, with what I believed were my last clear thoughts, that it was a strange thing for my mind to build. That if I were inventing a comfort to die inside, I would not have invented a child of the enemy humming beside me in the dark. I did not have the imagination for it. It was too specific, too small, too unprofitable, too kind. And that was the thought that reality, unlike a dying mind, is under no obligation to make sense or to serve you, that told me I was not dead, and that this was happening, and that I had better find a way to live through it so that I could report the one thing that mattered, that the assessment was wrong. And I remember, near the worst of the dark, understanding one thing clearly through all the broken pieces, that the assessment was wrong, not slightly wrong, wrong at the root. We had looked down at the lights and the singing and the wrapped gifts, and we had read softness, and we had been exactly, catastrophically wrong, because the lights and the singing and the gifts were not softness. They were what a people does when it has already beaten the thing at the door. You do not fear the cold when you have learned to build houses out of it. You do not fear the long dark when you have decided to fill it with fire and song on purpose, to spite it. The festival we had logged as evidence of harmlessness was in fact the loudest possible statement of the opposite. It was a whole species standing in the teeth of a killing season every single year and singing at it. We had photographed their victory dance and filed it as weakness. I lay in the snow wall a child had built, and I understood that my fleet had marked a predator world harmless because the predators were, for once, at peace. Morning came. Their star came back up over the tree line, and the white slope went from black to blue to a white so bright it hurt what was left of my sight, and the cold, impossibly, got worse before it got better, in the way I would learn cold does at the hinge of the day. But I was alive to feel it get worse, and that was the children's doing and the old ones. And the settlement had woken up, and the settlement had noticed that its two young ones had not come home, and the settlement had come looking, and it had found the pod. Here is where the boards always lean forward, because here is where they expect the massacre. A downed enemy scout, a hostile crash site, two of the settlement's children in the hands of the alien. On any world I had ever surveyed, that is the moment the herd turns into a mob and the mob does what mobs do. I braced for it. Even half frozen, even after the night, I braced for it. Because a mob was a thing I understood, a thing that fit my frame, and I was almost relieved to see it coming, because at least the trap was finally springing and I could stop being confused. They came over the rise with lights and with the long tools they used for the snow, a dozen adults more, and they saw the pod and they saw me inside the snow wall and they saw their children beside me, and they stopped. And the old one stood up. He was not their leader. I understood that later. He held no rank in the settlement. He was only an old man who lived at the edge of it and knew the cold better than most. But he stood up between the mob and the pod, this old, dense, unarmed human, and he spoke to them. Not loudly. He never once in the whole of that winter raised his voice, and I have thought about that a great deal, because among my own kind volume is authority and the one who shouts loudest commands. He spoke low and level, and he gestured at me, at the frozen drive, at the wall of snow, at his own two hands. And whatever he said, the mob that had come over the rise ready to do mob things listened, and the readiness went out of them, one by one, like lamps being turned down. I have replayed that moment more than any other, because it is the one where my whole model of these people should have broken and instead only bent. Watch it as I watched it. A crowd comes over a rise with its blood up, having found an alien crash and its own young in the alien's reach. On every world I have ever weighed, that crowd does the killing thing, and it does it fast, because a crowd with its blood up is the least reasoning animal in the reach, my own caste included. I will say that plainly. And this crowd stopped, and listened to one old man with no rank and put its blood back down. I told myself, still clinging to my frame, that this proved they were tame, herd-broken, easily led. That was the last time my old frame spoke, because even as I thought it I knew it was wrong, because a herd-broken people does not send its young out alone into a killing dark, and a tame people does not turn out its whole strength to fix a stranger's ship for nothing. What I was watching was not tameness. It was a people so sure of itself that it did not need to kill the thing it had cornered in order to feel safe. Certainty does not need to shout. Certainty can afford to listen to an old man and then go get its tools. The small one, Nessa, went to the front of the crowd and found the two adults who were plainly her parents, and she talked to them, fast, pointing back at me, and one of them, her mother, came forward past the old man and crouched at the mouth of the snow wall and looked at me. At the alien who had come down to mark her world for a fleet. At the thing that had shown her daughter a blade. I met her eyes. I had no words. I had nothing but the memory of her child holding out a sweet in the dark, and the fact that I was still breathing, which was that child's doing. The mother looked at me for a long time. I could not read the human face well even by then, but I could read that she was doing something hard, weighing something, and I understood the shape of the weighing because I had spent my life weighing worlds. She was weighing me. She had a child's word and an old man's word and a snow wall and a frozen alien with a blade at his hip, and she was deciding, right there in the mouth of that shelter, whether the thing in front of her was a threat to be ended or a life to be saved, and she was deciding it with her own young standing an arm's length away. On my world, the calculation is simple, and it always comes out the same. An unknown is a threat, and a threat near your young is a dead threat. She did not make that calculation. Or she made it and came out the other side, which is harder and rarer and the thing I have never been able to explain. Then she reached into her own fabric and took out another of the wrapped sweets, and she set it down on the snow inside the wall, within reach of my frozen talon, exactly as her daughter had. And she stood up and turned to the crowd and said something. And the crowd, the mob, the thing I had been braced for all night, put down its long tools and went to work. Not on me, on the pod. I have to slow down here because this is the part I have never made a single board understand, and it is the part that matters most. A whole settlement of a species we had marked as harmless prey turned out over the following days to a downed enemy craft, and they did not strip it, and they did not burn it, and they did not turn it into a weapon or a trophy or a lever. They repaired it. They saw a stranded thing that wanted to go home, and they decided collectively, without any authority ordering them to, that they would send it home. The old one directed it. The boy Tomas translated the old one's slow, careful sense of the machine into small-handed work in the housing. The settlement's makers. They had makers, of course they had makers. A people that beats the cold has makers. Studied the drive that the cold had thickened and understood the problem faster than I would have believed, and rerouted it, and warmed the lines with their own festival fire methods, and drew the thickened coolant off and thinned it and put it back. They fixed my pod using the same competence they used to survive the season that would have killed me in an afternoon. And that competence, casual, unhurried, complete, was the thing that finished the unmaking of my certainty. I had come down believing I was the hunter, and they were the soft young of a soft world. I sat in the snow and watched a species treat a killing cold and a broken starship with the same ordinary confidence. The confidence of a people that has simply never met a problem the world could hand them that they did not eventually solve, and I understood that the word harmless had never once applied to them. It had only ever applied to their mood. They were not soft, they were at rest. There is a difference, and my fleet had staked an assessment on not knowing it. Let me tell you about the makers, because they are the part I understood best, being something of a maker myself. Two of them worked the drive with the old one and the boy. A broad woman with burned hands who I gathered kept the settlement's machines running through the season, and a thin man who did the fine work, the delicate joins. They had never seen a drive like mine. They had never seen anything like mine, and they did not treat it as a mystery to be feared or a trophy to be broken open. They treated it as a machine, which is to say as a thing built by someone to do a job, and therefore a thing that could be understood by working backward from the job to the build. They opened the housing and they followed the lines with their eyes and their scarred fingers, and the burned-handed woman found the thickened coolant and understood in a single afternoon what the cold had done, because of course she understood it. She had spent her life understanding what the cold does to fluids in lines. That is what the season teaches every maker it does not kill. They could not read my instruments. They did not need to. They read the machine the way the old one read the cold, as a native reads a language, without translation, because it is simply the world they live in. And here is the thing I keep coming back to. They fixed a starship they could not read using nothing but the competence a killing world had beaten into them over I do not know how many generations. And they did it in the gaps between the festival, between the singing and the sweets and the lights, as if it were one more task in a season full of tasks. On my world, the arrival of an alien craft would have stopped everything. It would have been the only event. Here it was a thing they did in the afternoons, and in the evenings they went back down to the lights and sang. And I sat in my snow wall on the slope above them, and listened to a species that had just casually repaired an interstellar drive singing at the dark for the joy of it, and I could not have told you which of the two things frightened me more. I want to name the thing plainly, the thing my cast most needs to hear and will least believe. It was not any single capability that undid me. We have capabilities. We have makers and we have cold worlds of our own, though nothing like that one. It was the ratio. It was watching them spend so little of themselves on a thing that should have cost them everything, the alien, the ship, the killing night, and have so much left over. Left over for song. Left over for sweets pressed into a stranger's frozen talon. A people is dangerous not in proportion to what it can do, but in proportion to what it can do without noticing the cost. And these people repaired my drive and saved my life, and never once seemed to be trying hard. That is the assessment I should have sent and did send, and that 3 boards refused. Not that they were strong, but that their strength was cheap to them. And a people whose strength is cheap has depths a fleet cannot see from orbit and should never agree to find out. It took them the better part of the festival to make the pod fly. I will not pretend I was useful. My talons came back slowly as the settlement kept me warm, and by the end I could grip again, and I did what small things I could under the boy's direction. But the truth is that a warm world scout was the least capable creature on that slope for the whole of that winter, and everyone present knew it, and no one made anything of it. That was another thing I could not have predicted. On my world, weakness is leverage. You never let the weak forget it. These people simply worked around my weakness the way they worked around a rock in the field, without comment, without cruelty, without ever once using it against me. On the last night before the pod was ready, the old one came and sat with me inside the snow wall, alone. The children were asleep. The settlement's festival was at its loudest below us, the strings of colored light burning against the dark, the singing carrying up the slope, the whole species doing its yearly loud thing in the teeth of the cold. And the old man sat beside me and looked down at his people's lights, and then he looked at me, and he did the thing that I carry with me still, that I will carry into whatever comes after this 4th telling. He pointed down at the lights. Then he pointed up past the tree line at the cold black sky where my fleet was. Then he pointed at the killing white all around us, the snow, the season, the thing that had had me in its hand on the first night. And he made a small gesture with his old dense hands, a gesture I had watched the children make, a gesture that in their tongue meant nothing more than, "This is ours. We live here. This is only our home." He was not threatening me. Understand that. He was the least threatening being I have ever sat beside. He was telling me, as kindly as one creature can tell another, a simple true thing about where I had landed. That the cold I could not survive was the water they swam in. That the dark I feared was the dark they lit up on purpose every year for joy. That the world my fleet had marked harmless was a world that killed things like me by accident, in an afternoon, without malice, simply by being itself, and that its people had made a peace with that fact so complete that they could afford to be kind to the very scouts sent to weigh them for a war. And then he did one more thing, and this is the part I have never given aboard, because it is the part I could not say without my voice doing something I did not want a board to see. He reached over slowly, the way he had reached past my blade that first night, and he set his old bare hand flat against the housing of my repaired drive, and then against the joint of my suit where the cold had nearly finished me, and he held it there a moment on each, as if measuring, as if checking one last time that the warmth was holding. And then he took his hand back and folded it with the other in his lap and went back to watching his people's lights, and did not look at me again and did not need to. He had said everything. He had said, "I know what this cold does to you because I have felt it try me, and it does not try me the way it tries you, and I have decided, knowing that, to send you home warm. There is no word in my language for what that is. We do not have the concept. I have spent 40 years trying to build the concept out of other words, and I have not managed it, and I am too old now to manage it. And so I will simply set it in the record unexplained and trust that whoever reads this has felt a cold once somewhere, and had a stranger loosen its grip for no reason, but that they could. I have delivered that to 4 boards now and watched 4 boards fail to feel it. I do not blame them. You cannot feel it from a chair in the warm reach. You have to have been in the hand of that cold, and had it loosened by a wall a child built, to understand what it means that a people who live inside that hand every year still had kindness left over to spend on their enemy. The pod flew on the morning the festival ended. Before it flew, though, there was one more thing, and I have gone back and forth on whether to set it in the record, because it is the smallest thing in the whole account, and it may be the largest. When the drive finally cycled clean and held the burned-handed woman's doing, the thin man's fine joints holding warm against the cold, the two children asked something of the old one, and the old one considered it, and then he looked at me, and asked it of me in the only way we had, by gesture. They wanted to go up. Not far. Just up, off the killing slope, into the bright cold air above their world, in the machine they had spent a festival saving. On my world you would no more put an enemy's young into your craft than you would hand them your blade. But I understood by then that they did not see it as an enemy's craft. They had fixed it. In some way that mattered to them it was theirs now too, or mine and theirs, a thing made whole by shared work, and they wanted to see what it did. So I took them up. Nessa and Tomas, wedged into a scout pod built for one warm world adult, pressed against the cold instruments, watching the white slope drop away below them, and their settlement's dying festival lights shrink to a scatter of colored sparks on the vast dark-end white face of their world. They were not afraid. Of course they were not afraid. I have never in my life seen two creatures less afraid of anything, and I had spent the winter learning why. And for a few minutes, I flew the children of a world I had come to weigh for a war over the top of that world, and they pressed their small covered hands to the viewport, and made the high delighted sound their kind makes, and I understood that I would sooner have died in the first night's cold than let anything happen to them, and that this too was a thing my caste had no concept for, and that I no longer cared. Then I took them down, because the old one was waiting, and because a pod is not a toy, and because the fleet was hours out and would want its scout. And the old one and the two children and the mother who had left me a sweet stood on the white slope and watched me lift, and the small one, Nessa, raised her covered hand, and I did not know their farewell gesture, but I understood it the way I had understood everything they gave me, by the tone of it, which was warm, in a place that had every reason to be cold. I made my report to the fleet. I told them the assessment was wrong. I told them the festival was not weakness. I told them the world killed things like us in an afternoon, and that its people had made a home of it and had, when they found an enemy dying in their snow, chosen to build him a wall and give him a sweet and send him home. I told them that harmless was the most dangerous word in the whole survey, and that we should strike it and start again. The first board did not believe me. I stood before it still half crippled from the cold, my talons never again to close the last of the way, and I told it what I have told you, and it heard a scout who had lost his pod and needed a story larger than his failure to hide behind. It marked the world harmless a second time, over my objection, and it entered my objection as evidence of my unfitness rather than as evidence about the world. That is how doctrine defends itself. It does not argue with the scout, it reclassifies the scout. The second board convened when the fleet, acting on the reaffirmed assessment, sent a proper contact force down to that world, expecting to weigh a soft people at leisure. And the contact force came back changed, the way I had come back changed, having met the same competence and the same cheap strength and the same disquieting kindness, and having no better words for it than I had. That board wanted to know whether I had betrayed the fleet, whether I had somehow warned the world, whether my report had been the first act of a treason that explained why the contact force found no soft people where a soft people had been promised. I told it the truth, which is that I had warned no one, that the world needed no warning, that a people that repairs a starship in the gaps of a festival does not require a traitor's help to be formidable. The board did not know what to do with that, so it did nothing, which is its own kind of verdict. The third board was the worst, because it was kind. It had decided in advance that I was to be pitied. It thought the cold had softened my mind, that I had bonded with my rescuers the way a broken animal bonds, that everything I reported about the world was the distortion of a scout who had been too grateful for too long to 2 children and an old man. It spoke to me gently, and it filed my testimony under injury, and it was the closest any of them came to breaking me, because there is nothing harder to answer than a kindness that has already decided you are wrong. Only now, old, with my membranes never fully closed since that winter, telling it for the 4th and final time, do I no longer need to be believed. I know what I sat inside. I know what built the wall. We marked their world harmless because we saw them singing. We did not know that a people only sings like that after it has already won. And by the time the one hunter we sent down understood it, the cold had had him first, and the small hands of the world's soft young had pulled him back out, not because they were soft, but because they could afford to be. That is the whole of it. That is what I have been trying to say to 4 boards across all these years, and what I will say once more plainly, and then be done. We went looking for prey, and we found a people so far past fear that they had turned their killing season into a festival of lights. Weigh that, whoever reads this. Weigh it before you send anyone down again.